264 for Tyson Fury and 253 for Dillian Whyte. In English money, that's 18 stone 1 for Whyte and 18 stone 12 for the Gypsy King Tyson Fury. Now, I like this weight for Tyson Fury. I'm glad that he's come in a bit lighter than he was for his past few fights against Deontay Wilder, because Dillian Whyte is a more versatile and technically sound fighter than Deontay Wilder. And therefore, I think that Fury might need to be versatile in this fight. 264 is conducive to versatility, more so than a weight close to 280. If he has to move against Dillian Whyte, it will be a bit more difficult to move when you are close to 280 pounds. You see it? So I like this way. I think it's a happy medium. Now, if we look at the history of Tyson Fury's weight, 277 in the last Wilder fight, 273 prior to that, 254 against Otto Wallin. And in that fight, John Fury and several others since have said that Tyson Fury was too weak in that fight, that he tried to boil down too low at 254. Well, here he is 10 pounds heavier than he was against Wallin. In fact, he's an almost identical weight to what he weighed against Tom Schwartz. And even though Tom Schwartz is not a good heavyweight, Tyson Fury looked very energized, didn't he, in that 2-round fight against Tom Schwartz, was doing all the Muhammad Ali-esque type rope-a-dope stuff and switch hitting and all that kind of business. So, yeah, I think that this is a good weight for Tyson Fury. He certainly looked full of energy at the weigh-in. He looked very happy. He looked absolutely full of life and ready to go. And I'll come on to how both guys looked in terms of their demeanor and what have you a bit later on. But moving on to Dillian Whyte and his weight, 253. To me, this is not ideal for Dillian Whyte. I'm not saying that he still can't win the fight at this weight, but ideally, I think he should have been a bit lighter than this. And a lot of people were surprised, including myself, that he's come in this heavy, because if you saw him in all the BT pre-fight stuff that they were doing over there in Portugal, he looked trim. He looked really trim. So I was thinking he might even come in the low 240s. He's coming in the low 250s. So heavier than I expected. Having said that, he did look solid on the scales. I've seen Dillian Whyte around 252, 253 before, and he looked more fleshy than this. So there's obviously muscle there. The muscle to fat ratio is obviously quite good. But whether it's muscle, whether it's fat, regardless of what it is, I just think 253 is not an ideal weight for Dillian Whyte to be against Tyson Fury. I think it would have been better for him to come in closer to 240, the lighter the better in my view. Now, there are two schools of thought in terms of how Dillian Whyte should approach this fight. One school of thought is that he just needs to rush Tyson Fury, just needs to attack him in a similar fashion to how he attacked Alexander Povetkin in his last fight. The other school of thought is that he needs to be a bit more technical, not necessarily try and box Fury, but just be a bit sensible and work his way in behind the jab. I, in a previous video, mentioned Ray Mercer and Frank Bruno when they fought Lennox Lewis. They worked their way in behind the jab. They didn't just rush Lewis recklessly. They worked their way in behind the jab. Both guys had a lot of success against Lewis with the jab. And I think Dillian Whyte should box a similar way against Tyson Fury. Work his way in behind the jab, be sensible, and then, of course, when you get the opportunity, open up when you're at mid and close range. Fighting that way, for my money, would require Dillian Whyte to be a bit lighter than this, because you're going to have to try and keep up with Tyson Fury in terms of foot speed. When you get those opportunities, let's say you manage to push him back with a jab, he's off balance, you get the opportunity then to rush in, and it has to be quick. At 253, is he going to be fast enough to do that? Now, if they've worked on his leg strength and his calf muscles and all this, if that's where most of the weight is, then perhaps he will still be quick enough to cover the ground and get in, because Dillian Whyte has been known as a plodder. He's never been known as a fast-footed guy. So in my head, I'm thinking he needs to do things here that he hasn't done for many, many years, i.e. be a bit more fleet of foot, like we saw him in the amateurs, for example. So yeah, for me, 253 is not ideal, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. Perhaps he'll surprise me and be a lot more nimble at this weight than I'm expecting him to be. Now, in terms of the demeanor of both guys, Tyson Fury commanded the room, as he always does. There was a big crowd there at Box Park Wembley for him. He was soaking in the atmosphere. He was made for this, Tyson Fury. He's a showman. He loves these big occasions. The fans were all screaming his name. He got up on the stage, puffed his chest out, absolutely loving it. A guy who's happy, a guy who's relaxed, a guy who's full of confidence. But is he even better when he feels that he's maybe the underdog? Is he even better when he feels a bit of fear of his opponent? Because in my view, he is. He's at his absolute best when there's a little bit of tension there and people think he's going to lose. So here against Dillian Whyte, he's a big favorite. Will he be able to perform to the level that he has in other fights where people didn't think that he would win? In the, let's say, Vladimir Klitschko fight, the first Deontay Wilder fight, etc. Remains to be seen. Now, as far as Dillian Whyte, he didn't look as relaxed as Tyson Fury, and Lennox Lewis made a very astute observation. He said that Dillian Whyte looks like a guy who has just come out of isolation, as he has in Portugal, right? He's been holed up in his training camp over there in Portugal, away from all the fanfare. And Lewis said that the look on Dillian Whyte's face is the same look that he used to have on his face when he'd come down from the Poconos to go fight in Vegas or wherever, because you're in isolation up there, you know, some remote location, and it's just you and a few sparring partners and your trainer and all that. And then all of a sudden you come down to Vegas and there's lights everywhere and journalists asking you questions, and it can be overwhelming to the senses. And Lennox said that Dillian has that look about him. That doesn't necessarily mean he's frozen or anything, but again, it's just a bit jarring to come from an isolated environment to an environment where there's fanfare and media everywhere and lights and camera and all this kind of stuff. That can lead to a fighter freezing. That can lead to a fighter maybe not being in the right place mentally. But I think what Dillian Whyte is doing is trying to focus on what's familiar to him, because he did look a bit more tense than Tyson Fury at the weigh-in. So his way of coping with it, in my view, is trying to focus on what's familiar. And what's familiar to Dillian Whyte is Tyson Fury, or even Luke. That's what Dillian says they used to call him. That's officially Tyson Fury's middle name now, although I do seem to remember earlier on in Tyson Fury's career, very early on, that on BoxRec they had Luke as his first name and Tyson as his middle name for a while. But anyway, I think Dillian Whyte is trying to focus on Tyson Fury, or Luke, his old training buddy from back in the days. The guy he used to live with, eat with, train with, spar with, go out for drinks with. That's what Dillian Whyte is for. He's not trying to focus on the Gypsy King and the world heavyweight champion and this huge event in Wembley and all the... He wants to block all that stuff out. That's what he's trying to do. And his way of doing it is just to focus on what's familiar. Tyson, my old training buddy. That's it. Or Luke, my old training buddy. Not all the fanfare. So that's my take on the weigh-in, on the weights. I think that Dillian Whyte's strategy needs to be similar to Bruno or Ray Mercer against Lennox Lewis. And for Tyson Fury, I think that he just needs to remain versatile. Just be ready for whatever Dillian Whyte has, because the thing about Tyson Fury for me is that there's still a lot of unanswered questions. Tyson Fury has done fantastically well so far in his career, beating Deontay Wilder, beating Vladimir Klitschko. But when you break it down and you compare him to the great heavyweights of the past, he's not up there yet in terms of his resume. And that means that there's a lot of questions, at least in my head, there's still a lot of questions to be answered. People wanting to put Tyson Fury up there with the likes of Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson and Larry Holmes and all these other guys, he might get there eventually. But if you're realistic, Lennox Lewis, for example, had 17 world title fights, fought multiple Hall of Famers. Tyson Fury has had 4 world title fights. 3 of them were against the same guy. Okay, so as much potential as he has, and as good a wins as he had against Klitschko and Wilder, there's a long way to go, in my book, before I can put him up there with the heavyweight greats. He doesn't have the resume to be allowed to be spoken about in the same breath as those guys in terms of greatness and what have you. Styles make fights. We need to see Tyson Fury against a whole heap of different styles, not just fighting Deontay Wilder over and over again, a whole heap of different styles. This fight here against Dillian Whyte will tick some boxes for me, depending on how Tyson Fury deals with it. It's going to tick some boxes. Now, I've drawn comparisons between Tyson Fury and Muhammad Ali in the past, and I really do think that their personalities are quite similar. They're not exactly the same, of course, but there are certain similarities when it comes to their personality, especially as it pertains to boxing. The psychology that Tyson Fury employs regarding boxing is very similar to Ali's boxing psychology. Ali was this gregarious character, a joker who would, woo the crowd and everyone's laughing and joking at Ali and his antics. But really what he was doing was trying to psychologically dominate his opponents. Even though it seemed funny and all that kind of stuff, Ali would make up names for his opponents because he's trying to defeat them in his own mind, and he's actually trying to defeat them in the minds of the public as well. That's what he's doing by calling Sonny Liston the big ugly bear, or, this one, George Chuvalo, the washerwoman, and Floyd Patterson, the rabbit, the hare, the rabbit, all that kind of stuff. He's mocking the opponent, making light of them, laughing about them to basically defang them in his own mind, in the minds of the public, and also potentially in the mind of the opponent themselves. The opponent starts to feel goofy. Tyson Fury does that to his opponent. Did it so well with Wilder and so well with Klitschko. Ali used to do that. So there's similarities between the psychological approach of Tyson Fury and Ali. Now, one way that Tyson Fury and Ali are different, of course, is the way their careers have been managed. Because Ali took on all comers. And perhaps, in fact, almost certainly that was to his detriment in terms of health. He just took on everybody. Tyson Fury is more from the Mayweather school of things. He's not just out there to take on any man at any time. He's more careful and more thoughtful about who he fights and when he fights them. It's not that he doesn't fight good fighters, because obviously he has fought some good fighters in Deontay Wilder and a great fighter in Vladimir Klitschko. But yeah, he just comes more from the Mayweather school of things, where he's a bit more business-minded and circumspect and careful about who he fights and when he fights them. But carrying on with the Ali comparisons, if Tyson Fury is the Ali of this era, and it's not going to be an exact like-for-like thing, but there are similarities. If we take him as the Ali of this era, is it possible that Dillian Whyte is the Ken Norton? That's a conversation I've been having in my Element group, because Ali had this rivalry with Joe Frazier, where they had 3 fights. Ali won 2, Frazier won 1. And as tough as those fights were, they weren't as tough in terms of actually getting wins. They weren't as tough as the Ken Norton fights. They were maybe more physically punishing, but in terms of trying to get a win on the scorecards, the Ken Norton fights were the toughest fights that Ali had. Yeah, or at least, well, some people say Jimmy Young and there were other fights out there, but he stopped Joe Frazier in the 3rd fight, beat him in the 2nd fight, right? What with Ken Norton, there's a strong argument to be made that Ali didn't beat Ken Norton even once in their 3 fights. The 1st fight, he officially lost in a split decision. The 2nd fight, a few months later, he won on a split decision. And several years after that, they fought for a 3rd time at Yankee Stadium. And many, many people believe that Ken Norton won that fight and that he was very hard done by not to get the decision on the scorecards. There was something about Ken Norton's style that Ali just couldn't get to grips with it. Because think about it. Ali had beaten Foreman, a guy who wiped out Ken Norton in 2 rounds, wiped out Joe Frazier in 2 rounds, was wiping all these people out. Ali went in there and knocked Foreman out in 8 rounds. But after that, he was given hell once again by Ken Norton. Ken Norton got knocked out earlier on in his career by some Latino guy whose name escapes me. And he was then knocked out by George Foreman in 2 rounds after the 2 Ali fights. And again, he goes on after that, after suffering devastating knockout defeats, he goes on to give Ali absolute hell at Yankee Stadium. There was just something about Norton's style that Ali could not get to grips with ever. That was his boogeyman, as Americans say, or bogeyman, as we say in the UK. Will Dillian Whyte turn out to be Tyson Fury's bogeyman? I don't know. I'm not saying that he will be. But again, I'm just trying to draw these comparisons between 1970s and right now if we cast Tyson Fury in the role of the Muhammad Ali character of this era. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And in fact, the press conference reminded me of a 1970s press conference where all these people were huddled together and there was like 1 million people on the stage. You go back and look at some of them Ali press conferences from the 70s. That's how they were. Loads of people huddled in. And I saw some people say, I didn't like the press conference. There was too many people. No, I really liked it. I don't understand why people dislike. I liked the press conference. And in fact, this build-up has been one of the most interesting build-ups to a heavyweight fight, or any fight for that matter, in a long time. It's been very interesting to me. Dillian Whyte didn't participate for a while because he wasn't happy with the way he was being treated by Frank Warren and what have you. But that actually helped build anticipation for when Dillian Whyte eventually did speak. Do you know what I mean? Like, people were just curious to see what Dillian Whyte had to say when he finally broke his silence. So in a way, that actually made people more interested in Dillian Whyte than they would have been if he'd been speaking all along. In fact, I have to big up the BT boxing team specifically because it has been a breath of fresh air. It's been none of the sterile, banal, corporate stuff that you get from Sky with the awful Adam Smith. I know he's been weaseling his way in to Fury Whyte with Top Rank. He's been doing some media work for them. But with that aside, if you just focus on the BT team, you've got David Hay, you got Carl Frampton, you got Basil Brush, as some people call him, Paul Dempsey, who some people don't like, but I think he's done an adequate job for this. Steve Bunce, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but he's done a pretty good job. And John Fury, who's working, it seems, more for Queensbury and Frank Warren on his YouTube channel rather than BT. This back and forth between John Fury and David Haye and Carl Frampton, that makes it interesting. I don't need pundits to have beef with each other in order for me to be entertained, but I at least need them to have some nice banter, some jokes and giggles, right? You don't get that on DAZN. You don't get that on Sky. It's all this sterile corporate rubbish. But with BT, we're actually getting that. With BT, we're getting some genuine banter that's interesting. We're getting good analysis from David Haye, Carl Frampton, Lennox Lewis, Paul Dempsey. And we've got a little bit of needle with the John Fury, the subplot with John Fury, Frampton, Haye, all this kind of stuff. It's interesting. Now, I know that the undercard is less than stellar, okay? But if we just focus on the main event and the punditry team, I think it's been absolutely first class. I loved the press conference. It reminded me, actually, going back to what I said about the comparisons between Tyson Fury and Ali and asking, is Dillian Whyte this era's Ken Norton? The press conference was shades of Ali Norton. I sound like Mick Hennessy now, but the press conference was kind of shades of Ali Norton. Where there was this like funny little banter between Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte? It was shades of Ali Norton to me. A very 70s feel to it and banter between the fight, the familiarity. So yeah, I like it, and long may it continue. Long may it continue. Now, as far as the fight itself, Tyson Fury is the most logical pick here, based upon his track record, based upon his versatility, his size, the fact that Dillian Whyte's been knocked out recently. But with all that being said, I go back to what I mentioned earlier on in the video. There's still a lot of questions in my head about Tyson Fury. Yeah, he's only had 4 world title fights and 3 of them were against the same guy. So I need to see him against Dillian Whyte's style. I need to see him against Usyk's style. I need to see him against Joshua's style. Maybe even some of the guys coming up. Philip Hrgovic, Joyce, Hunter, all these guys. If he can fight those guys and build up, 15, 16, 17 world title fights, which will then be comparable to a Lennox Lewis or a Mike Tyson, etc., then we can start talking about him, at least for me. Realistically, we can then start talking about him in the same breath as though all this talk about Tyson Fury being up there with a top 5 in history at this point is just unbelievably premature. How can you put a guy top 5 or even top 10 of all time when he's had 4 world title fights and 3 were against the same guy? Come on. That is testament to the great marketing job that Tyson Fury and his fans have done over the past few years in making it seem as though that's a reasonable thing to believe, that Tyson Fury's top 10 all time already when he's only had 4 world title fights and 3 of them were against the same man. Come on, the bar is not that low, folks. We have to expect more from him than that. And this Dillian Whyte fight will tell us more, because if he goes in there and smokes Dillian Whyte in 1 or 2 rounds, it's going to look great. It's going to look like this really could be eventually one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, like top 10, top 5 material, if he just goes in there and smokes him. I mean, even if he goes in there and struggles, he could still turn out to be one of the greatest heavyweights ever, because again, styles make fights. But yeah, if he just goes in there and does what many people believe he will, like Tommy Fury, like a bunch of other people in his team who think he's just going to go out there and deal with Dillian Whyte in about 5 or 6 rounds and it's going to be completely easy, a one-sided mismatch. If Tyson Fury does that, then of course that's a great feather in his cap, because Dillian Whyte is a guy who is a handful for everybody he fights. Name me one person that's been able to go in there and have an easy night against Dillian Whyte. They don't exist, or it hasn't happened yet. Joseph Parker obviously got beat. Povetkin was taking a beat down until he got that great knockout over Whyte with the uppercut. Joshua had his hands full until he finally got the fight under control and took Dillian Whyte out. So this guy is a rough night's work for anyone. If Tyson Fury goes in there and handles him with ease, I mean, you got to give him big credit for that. So let's see if he can do it. The energy of this fight is very interesting. I've been speaking to people in my Element group. I've been speaking to, or I've seen some of the comments on my YouTube channel, and there is a lot of people picking Dillian Whyte for the upset. It's a minority, but it's a sizable minority. Not within the boxing fraternity, but among boxing fans. I've seen countless people who have come to me and said, I feel like there's an upset in the air. I was watching an interview with Dave Allen, and he's strongly favoring Tyson Fury to win. But he said that his own dad, who apparently knows boxing, is picking Dillian Whyte to pull the upset off. And you can't say that that's a political thing. You can't say that there's any agenda behind that, as you might be able to reasonably say about David Haye or Derek Chisora. It's Dave Allen's dad. And he's saying, you know what, I think Whyte's going to beat him, son. So there are a lot of people who sense something in the air, that something dramatic is going to happen here. I don't know. I mean, it is a different vibe in the build up to this fight than we're used to. I like the vibe, but it is different. It does harken back to the old days. And again, partly because of the fact that it isn't this awful, sterile, Adam Smith corporate type of feeling, type of scenario that we normally get. This is a lot more raw, a lot more visceral, a lot more interesting. There's an energy about this fight. So does that mean Dillian Whyte is going to pull off the upset? I don't know. I think at the very least, it means we're going to get a rousing spectacle. We're going to get something that will get the heart pumping, the blood racing, whether it's a seesaw battle where both guys hit the deck, remains to be seen. But I do think that it's going to be exciting however long it lasts. Exciting. I don't expect it to just be one guy go, well, actually, let me not say that, because that would still be exciting. If one guy goes out there and wins in a round, it's still exciting, right? But I don't think it's going to be a soporific affair. I think it's going to be interesting. So, and there are some people, I think, was it John Fury, several others, who've said that they expect this to be like the second Derek Chisora fight when Tyson Fury just picked him apart, got him under control early and just, coasted in the fight. Not coasted in the sense that he wasn't working, but it was just easy for him. It was plain sailing. He was almost on autopilot. It was so easy for him. And of course, Derek Chisora was retired on his stool later on in that fight. The difference here with Dillian Whyte, or potential difference, is that Dillian Whyte jab, as I said before. Because Derek Chisora didn't have that. He's just an out-and-out pressure fighter. Now, pressure fighters can jab, of course, but he's never been as dedicated to the jab as Dillian Whyte is. And Dillian Whyte stands more straight up. He's got longer arms than Derek Chisora, and he's shown the ability to land a jab against a much taller man in Robert Helenius. So, yeah, to me, that could be the difference here. That could be Dillian Whyte's saving grace and the reason why it might not be so straightforward for Fury in this fight as it was in that second Chisora fight, where it might be a bit more of a complicated puzzle that he has to solve here. And again, Chisora is not the guy for counterpunches either. When Chisora backs up into a corner, he can come out with some random counters. But again, he's not as well versed. That's not as integral part of Chisora's game as it is for Dillian Whyte, who's well known for his counters, particularly with the left hook. But he said don't sleep on the right hand in this fight. So, and I've been watching a lot of interviews, and there was one interview I saw with Dillian Whyte where, I mean, you never know because there's a lot of kidology going on, but he seemed to suggest that he was going to employ the kind of tactics that I think he should employ, where he's being a bit more technical. He's not trying to necessarily outbox Tyson Fury, right? He's not doing what AJ did against Usyk, but he's also just not rushing in like he did in the Povetkin rematch. But more so, he's working his way in behind the jab and actually making a nuisance of himself with that jab. Never underestimate the way that a good jab can actually foil the plans of a superior boxer. A good jab. You could have a guy who has all the athleticism and the switch hitting and all this kind of stuff, and you just keep your defenses tight and stick a good jab on him, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, the guy's struggling. It's like Badu Jack. Maybe this is not the greatest comparison, but Badu Jack when he fought James DeGale. Badu Jack's a more rudimentary fighter than James DeGale. He isn't able to switch hit and do all this other kind of stuff that James DeGale could do. He's a more basic, more rudimentary guy. But his basics make him difficult to deal with at times because he does them so well, And that's what a good jab can do. It's like Vernon Forrest. Now, Vernon Forrest had the height and reach over Shane Mosley, but he certainly wasn't the more athletically gifted guy. He wasn't the faster guy. He wasn't the more powerful guy. He wasn't the pound for pound guy. But Vernon Forrest just stuck a jab on him. And there was nothing Mosley could do. He didn't know what was going on. Man was just sticking a simple jab on him, and he couldn't cope with it. Joe Joyce against Daniel Dubois, stuck a jab. Now, again, in these instances, you got a guy with a height advantage. And of course, in this case, Dillian Whyte has got the height disadvantage and potentially the arm length disadvantage. But as I've said before, Ray Mercer against Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis was a more athletically gifted, taller, rangier fighter, more versatile fighter than Mercer. And he had all types of trouble in that fight because Mercer stuck a jab on him. Same with Frank Bruno. Lewis was just all round better than Bruno in just about every department. But Bruno stuck to that solid jab and Lewis had lots of trouble. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I'm thinking that's what Dillian Whyte needs to do. Stick that big jab on him. Keep it tight. Use some footwork coming in. Stick that jab on him. Keep it simple. Whereas Tyson Fury can do all this switch hitting and all this other stuff he wants to do, stick that jab on him. Just keep consistent with that jab. When Tyson Fury tries to make offensive moves, little steps here to the left and right, or duck underneath and come with a hook, just keep it simple. When you are fighting a guy who's more dexterous than you, who's taller, rangier, more athletically gifted, can switch hit, you don't want to try and match him in the things he's good at. The only thing you want to do, as the old adage goes, you can't hook with a hooker, but you can jab with a jabber. Jab with him. So I'll leave it there. Bit of a long-winded video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below about Tyson Fury's weight, Dillian Whyte's weight, how they look to the weigh-in. Do you agree with me that Tyson Fury just looked totally relaxed? He just owned the moment, looked great. Dillian Whyte, slightly more tense, but was trying to focus on things that are familiar, like Tyson Fury being his old training buddy back in the days, so he doesn't allow all this other stuff to overwhelm him. The fanfare and the media and the Gypsy King and all the fans, doesn't want that to overwhelm him, so he just focuses on what's familiar to him. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.